Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. This week we're working on this piece that's behind me, and so far I've just got some prep done on it. I took the top back down to its raw wood, and then the body's just got some primer on it. This piece is made by Pulaski, and it actually came to me from my customer. It's a fairly modern piece, but it's really well made. And so when you have really well made pieces of furniture and they're not quite the look that you want, you can always make them over. And so I'm proud to get my hands on this one. It's actually going to be part of a set that we're doing for a little girl's nursery. We're going to be incorporating a bee theme onto this one, so I've got a whole bunch of little bee themed tools that we're going to be using on this, a beautiful treatment on the top, a soft blended paint finish on the body, and a lot of different techniques. We're going to be using polyonlay appliques, which are a laser cut wood that comes in some bee designs that are going to be really fun, some honeycomb, different shapes in there. So I think this is a great way to turn really well-made pieces of furniture that weren't the look that you wanted into a set that's going to be exactly what you were after. Let's get started. Here's where I started on this piece. This was actually brought to me by my customer, and it's made by Pulaski Furniture, so it's really high quality, definitely worth refinishing, but it did have some damage in the original finishes. This set is going to be for a nursery, so we're pulling our inspiration from the crib here from Restoration Hardware, and then also from her wood flooring, which has some gray tones in it. Knowing that we're going to be working in shades of white and gray, I know how I need to get started on this finish, and I started out by giving it a really thorough cleaning, and next I'm going to scuff sand over the entire surface of my piece using a 120 grit paper on top of my Surf Prep sander. I love having company out in my workspace, so I did get some help on this one. They're going to go ahead and take off the hardware and help me with some video work while I do my sanding. I have little caddies that I store my hardware in, and so every time I take the hardware off of a piece, it all goes into one section of the caddy so that all my hardware stays together and doesn't get lost while I'm working on the piece. While taking this one apart, I did notice that it had some broken and cracked drawer glide pieces, and so I went ahead and ordered these on the line, and I'm going to replace those at the same time. For this one, we're going to do a wood stain top, and this has a beautiful wood top on it. It is a veneer, but it's very thick, and it was nice to go ahead and sand. We're going to take it down to the raw wood. I'm just using my Surf Prep sander. I've got an 80 grit paper to start to cut through that clear coat. I'm going to finish off with a 120 and then a 220 grit paper to get this nice and smooth. Along with sanding the top, I do need to get into these deep crevices that have that old dark wood stain in them. I'm going to use my carbide scraper, and I offset the blade just ever so slightly so that it can get into these 90-degree corners and scrape out that extra clear coat and old stain. I went ahead and applied a coat of Weisel primer in white, and I'm let that dry, and now I'm going to go ahead and get started on some of my finishes. We're doing a bumblebee theme for this entire set, and I want that to be mimicked around all sides of my piece. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a raised stencil using this bee trellis stencil from Royal Design Stencils, and I'm applying it using a little bit of joint compound and a putty knife. I'm going to take the putty knife and scrape it over the top of my stencil, leaving a thin layer of the joint compound on my piece. This is what the stencil looked like when we were done. I do need to make sure that I give this a coat of primer over the top, because if I try to paint the joint compound, it will reactivate and I can smear it and smudge it. So this extra coat of primer is just going to protect that raised stencil while I paint over the top. With my stencil completely dry and my primer nice and dry as well, it's time to go ahead and start adding some paint to this piece. We're going to be using shades of white and gray on this piece, and in the center I'm going to start out with Snow Owl, which is a nice, clean, crisp white color, and around the edges I'm going to shade that in using some smoky quartz, which is this medium gray. I started out by adding my Snow Owl to the center, and then I'm going to come around and frame it out in some of the smoky quartz, and I'm going to lightly brush those two together. This is just my base coat, so it doesn't need to be perfect, but I want to get my overall color layout decided. I did also decide to add a little bit of weathervane, which is a nice dark charcoal gray, down onto the legs of this piece, so overall it's a 3-color combination. When I'm working these two colors together, I just add a little bit of water, and then I'm just going to use a nice clean dry brush and brush them together with a nice wide overlap so that they fade into each other and I don't have a defined line where one color stops and the next starts. Let's go ahead and move around to the front of this piece, and we're going to repeat the same color combination over the top of the primer on the front of the piece as well. In this case, I'm starting out with the smoky quartz around the edges of my drawers. This one takes a little bit more time than the flat sides because I do need to work in and out of those drawers. I do always take my drawers out after I blend over the surface of the front and make sure I get around the frame so that matches as well, but I leave the drawers in for this part so that I can get a nice, smooth, even blend across this entire front. You'll notice on this side, I am starting with my smoky quartz, whereas on the other side, I started with the snow owl in the center. There is no right or wrong way to do this. The only thing I do try to do is reverse the order on the first coat and the second coat so that I make sure that I get them nice and even. I tend to be heavier handed with the color that I start with, so I find that if I reverse them on my next coat, I get them more even. That just comes with being aware of what some of my habits are, and so that's always a good thing to notice. Now that I've got my smoky quartz brushed around the entire edge of this drawer, I've framed out sort of an oval shaped in the center, and this is where I'm going to brush that snow owl into the center and start working it into the smoky quartz around the edges. You'll notice I brought the smoky quartz in a little bit further than I need it, and that's so that I have a little bit of excess paint around those edges to work into the white. I'm going to work my way up one drawer at a time on this piece, just paying attention to the blends on one drawer at a time until overall I have a nice and consistent look. So let's go ahead and finish up the coat on the front of this piece and we'll move on to our next step. Once I had my first coat on, I went around the entire piece and I'm going to repeat the same process with my second coat. The second coat takes me dramatically more time than that base coat because this is where I really want to perfect my blends, get those nice and smooth, so sometimes I go over them multiple times until I like how it looks. This is where my piece landed with 2 coats of paint over the entire body. My paint is complete. I'm ready to start adding some accents. So if you remember from the beginning of this video, we are pulling some of our inspiration from the wood tones in my customer's house, which has some gray tones in it. And so I want to take down some of the orange tones that are in this wood. Now that I've got it all sanded down, I made sure I removed any paint that I got onto the edges when I was painting the body. And I'm going to use a weathered wood accelerator from Varathane. And what this does is it's going to gray the wood naturally. It's going to take out some of these orange tones naturally. It brushes on like a really thin coat. I'm going to accelerate it here using my heat gun just to show you sort of the process, but usually I just let this dry naturally. You can see how it starts to gray the wood. It just dulls those orange tones and kind of creates a gray in it. I'm going to show you on this section with the heat gun as well because I think this product is pretty cool. I went ahead and applied a few coats of this. It gets a little bit deeper with each one, and so I found 2, sometimes 3 coats of this. It gave me exactly the color on the top of this that I wanted. I want to bring out some of that raised stencil detail that we did on the sides of this piece, and I'm going to do that using a little bit of gilding wax. So this is Shiny Star Gilding Wax from Redesign with Prima. It's a nice soft silver color, and I'm just going to feather over the top of that raised stencil using a brush. This is going to give a light hint of the silver over the top, so it's got the raised detail and also a little bit of the metallic. It makes this stencil stand out even more. I just placed my stencil over the top of where I already had the raised stencil, and I applied that gilding wax again. It wouldn't be one of my pieces without adding a little bit of black wax accents, so I'm going to do that using a fluffy brush, and I'm just going to feather in a little bit of black wax around the edges, and you can see it just kind of deepens the edges of that paint color, makes them a little bit darker than the body. It's just for a little bit of shadowing, and I do this on just about every one of my pieces. Black wax is definitely one of my must-haves. I add it on every single piece I do. I am applying this over raw paint, but if you feel nervous applying dark waxes on raw paint, you can seal your paint beforehand. I just really like how wax takes to the raw paint. It gives me the look that I'm after. I do add this wax with a very soft hand. It's very little wax, so that's one key to applying this. Next, I'm going to be applying some polyonlay, and these are really thin laser cut wood cutouts, and they go with my bee theme on this piece. I've got the honeycomb. I went ahead and painted these in the smoky quartz so that they match the body of my piece, and now I'm just dry fitting to figure out this design, how I want it to fit. Once I figure out my design, I cut it with a pair of scissors, and then I'm going to use a little bit of spray adhesive on the back to attach these. This is Super 77 spray adhesive. I gave it a really thick coat on the back, and then I pressed it in place and held it while it dried. Along with my honeycomb pattern, I also have these hexagon shapes that I also painted to match the body of my piece. I'm going to flip them onto their backs and spray them heavily with that spray adhesive as well. And then I'm just going to use these to fill in the centers of some of those honeycomb shapes. The bee designs that I add to this piece are also from polyonlay, so this comes in a variety of shapes and a variety of themes that you can use to decorate your furniture pieces, and they're really fun to use, super easy to apply. Once these wood shapes are nice and dry with their adhesive, I can seal over the top of them and they'll be just like the front of my furniture piece. You can see my bees here. I added some flower accents from a transfer from Redesign with Prima to ground those bees, and my design on the front is complete. This furniture piece had some great details along the top and the bottom, and I want to bring those out adding a little bit of glaze. So this is black glaze. I'm going to brush it on over top of sealed paint, and then I'm going to wipe it back. I wipe it back using a dry rag first, and then I'm going to come back with a wet wipe and clean up any excess. I make sure that I apply my glaze over sealed paint because the paint will want to absorb the glaze and it won't wipe back as easily, so make sure you seal your paint before you're adding any glaze over top. Once my glaze is nice and dry, I do want to add some of that same silver gilding wax that I used on my side stencil onto these moldings as well. So I'm just feathering over the top of it lightly using a brush and Shiny Star Decor Wax from Redesign with Prima. This piece has a ton of details, but they're all complete, and this piece is ready for clear coat to seal them all in. So I'm spraying Wise Owl matte varnish over the surface of this. I'm going to do 2 coats on the body, and then I usually do 3 or 4 coats on the top. You can also brush your clear coat on or sponge it on. I choose to apply it using a sprayer for the sake of time, and it also gives me a nice smooth even coat. This piece is complete. What do you guys think? It's super fun. Look at that top. It's beautiful in those tones of gray. The front has a ton of details on it. I cleaned up the original hardware and left them in their gold color for just a nice soft touch of gold. I staged this with some silver and gold accents to pull out the colors from the piece, and we are done. This piece is part of a set, so look for the rest of the matching set also up on my YouTube channel. It's always fun to see different finishes applied to different pieces and see how they all turn out and coordinate in the end. You guys can find links for everything I use in the description for this post. You can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and on my website at brushbybrandy.com. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you click that subscribe button for weekly painting tutorials here at Brush by Brandy on YouTube.